The hum of the engines is the only thing I can hear right now. It's a deep, vibrating bass that starts in my chest and spreads all the way to my fingertips. Outside the window of the Gulfstream G650, the clouds over the Colorado Rockies look like whipped cream, soft, silent, and endless. But 6 months ago, I wasn't looking at the clouds from 30,000 feet. I was standing in a rain-slicked driveway in a middle-class neighborhood in Denver, watching my life get towed away. I can still smell the wet pavement from that afternoon. I remember the exact way the winch cable groaned as it pulled my 2022 Toyota Camry onto the flatbed trailer. It wasn't just a car. It was 3 years of double shifts, skipped meals, and saved pennies. It was my independence. And there stood my father, Robert, handing the keys to a man I'd never seen before. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the ground, or maybe on the sold sign, while my brother, Jackson, stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, looking like a kicked puppy. "It's for your brother's future, Olivia," my dad had said, his voice as flat as the tires on an old wreck. "Jackson's in deep with some bad people. $15,000 doesn't just grow on trees. You're the practical one. You'll figure out the bus schedule. Jackson. He needs this chance to clear his slate." Jackson had gambled away his tuition, his rent, and now my car in a single weekend at an offshore site, and my reward for being the responsible daughter was losing the only thing I owned outright. They thought they were selling my car to save him. They had no idea they were actually selling the last shred of my loyalty. They thought that was the end of my story. They imagined me as the girl on the bus, the invisible daughter who would just get by while they coddled their golden boy. They had no idea that while they were watching football highlights and ignoring my existence, I was building an empire in the silence of my bedroom. They thought I was walking away with nothing. Now, 6 months later, the only thing I'm worried about is the landing gear, because in 20 minutes, I'm landing at the private terminal in Aspen, and the family that sold my soul for a gambling debt is waiting there for a mystery donor to save their home from foreclosure. They're looking for a miracle. They're about to get a wake-up call that costs more than they'll earn in a lifetime. My name is Olivia, I'm 24 years old, and I'm from Denver, Colorado. In my family, I was always known as the practical one. While my brother Jackson was the star with big dreams that never quite launched, I was the daughter who worked 2 jobs, paid her own way through college, and never asked for a single cent. But I quickly learned that in a house built on favoritism, being practical is just a polite way of saying you're a safety net for everyone else's failures. If you've ever been made to feel like a secondary character in your own home, or if you've ever had your hard work treated like a communal bank account for a golden child sibling, then this story is for you. Stay with me, because what my parents did wasn't just a betrayal of my trust. It was an attempt to bury my future to save my brother's ego. Before I tell you how I turned a bus pass into a private flight, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are building a community here for people who have survived toxic family dynamics and found the strength to stand on their own. Your support helps us tell these stories. Also, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one of them. Now, let me take you back to the months leading up to that rainy Tuesday. To understand the jet, you have to understand the girl who thought a 2022 Toyota Camry was the greatest achievement of her life. Growing up in our house on the outskirts of Denver was like living in a theater where the spotlight only had enough power to shine on one person at a time. And in the Fitzgerald household, that person was never me. My brother, Jackson, is 3 years older, and from the moment he could grip a football, my parents decided he was our family's winning lottery ticket. He was the star quarterback at Cherry Creek High, the boy whose trophies lined the mahogany mantel while my straight-A report cards were tucked into a drawer or stuck to the side of the fridge, partially covered by a magnet for a local pizza place. My parents, Robert and Sarah, didn't just love Jackson, they worshipped the idea of him. They saw a future NFL star, a celebrity, someone who would put our name in the headlines and move us into a mansion in Cherry Hills. I was just Olivia, the one who stayed out of trouble, the one who didn't need help with math, the practical one. I started my first job at 16, working the cash register at a local Starbucks before school. I didn't do it because I had to help with the mortgage, at least not then. I did it because I realized very early on that if I wanted anything for myself, a pair of sneakers that weren't hand-me-downs, a movie ticket, or a savings account, I'd have to build that world with my own hands. I remember my junior year of high school clearly. I was working 30 hours a week while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, trying to save for college applications. Jackson, meanwhile, was on his fourth elite personal trainer that my dad was paying for with money he didn't really have. One night, I came home beaming because I'd finally saved my first $1,000. I told them at dinner, hoping for a good job, Olivia. Instead, my mother looked at me with a strained smile and said, "That's wonderful, honey. It's perfect timing, actually. Your brother needs new custom cleats and a travel fund for the scouting camp in Florida next month. Since you're so good with money, we're going to need you to contribute to the family goal." The family goal was really just a black hole named Jackson. Over the years, I watched them siphon off every resource for him. When his football dream fizzled out in community college because he didn't like the coach's vibe, they didn't tell him to get a job. Instead, they took out a second mortgage to fund his influencer journey. They bought him a high-end camera, a gimbal, and designer clothes to make him look successful on Instagram, all while I was driving a rusted-out 2005 sedan that shook violently every time I hit 60 on the I-25. By the time I was 22, I had worked myself to the bone. I had graduated college with honors while working as a medical scribe and taking freelance coding projects until 3 in the morning. I had finally saved enough to buy that 2022 Toyota Camry outright. It was my trophy. It was the physical proof that I didn't need their help. When I brought it home, my dad didn't even step out onto the porch to look at it. He was too busy on the phone with a talent manager who had promised Jackson a spot on a reality show, if we just paid a $5,000 processing fee. "You're the lucky one, Olivia," my mom told me that night as I stood at the sink, washing everyone's dinner dishes while Jackson sat in the living room playing Madden. "You don't have the crushing weight of expectations on your shoulders. You're built for the grind. Jackson, he has a sensitive soul. He needs us to clear the path so he can truly fly." That was the family mantra. Olivia is built for the grind. Jackson is built for greatness. It didn't matter that my grind was actually paying their utility bills half the time. It didn't matter that Jackson's greatness was just a series of expensive failures fueled by gambling apps and exclusive crypto tips he got from strangers on Discord. I was the safety net. I was the practical girl who stayed close to home because my parents told me I wasn't college material for the big leagues. I didn't realize then that they weren't trying to protect me from failure. They were trying to keep me small so I'd always be there to catch Jackson when he fell. But even a safety net can only take so much weight before it finally snaps. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of afternoon where the Denver sky turns a bruised shade of purple and the air carries the sharp, icy promise of a mountain winter. I had just finished an 11-hour shift, a combination of my data entry job and an extra few hours helping a local florist prep for a gala. My back ached, my feet were pulsing with pain, but as I walked toward the bus stop to head home, I felt a sense of pride. I had just checked my banking app. I was only a few $100s away from my next savings milestone. I remember thinking about my Camry. It was parked in the driveway of my parents' house. I'd spent the morning giving it a quick wash, and the silver paint had gleamed even under the overcast sky. It was more than a vehicle. It was my ticket out. I was planning to move into my own place by the first of the year. I just had to keep my head down and keep grinding. When the bus finally dropped me off 3 blocks from the house, the rain had started, a cold, stinging drizzle. I walked fast, my hood up, thinking about a hot shower and the leftover pasta in the fridge. But as I rounded the corner and my house came into view, my heart did a strange, nauseating flip. The driveway was empty. At first, I thought maybe my dad had moved it to get the lawnmower out, or maybe Jackson had borrowed it to run to the store, even though I'd told him 1,000 times never to touch my keys. I walked up the driveway, my eyes searching the street, thinking maybe I'd just parked it further down and forgotten. But the spot where my car usually sat was just a dark, wet rectangle on the concrete. I burst through the front door, the smell of my mom's pot roast hitting me like a physical blow. It was so normal, so domestic. My dad was in his recliner and my mom was setting the table. Jackson was on the sofa, his eyes glued to his phone, but he looked twitchy. Guilt was rolling off him in waves. "Where's my car?" I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended. I didn't even take off my wet coat. My mother stopped, a stack of napkins in her hand. She didn't look at me. She looked at my father. Robert cleared his throat, but he didn't look up from the news. "Olivia, sit down. Let's have dinner first." "I don't want dinner, Dad. I want to know why my car isn't in the driveway. Did it get stolen? Should I call the police?" "No," Jackson muttered from the couch, finally looking up. His face was pale. "Don't call the police." My father finally stood up, sighing like I was the one being difficult. "Olivia, we had a crisis, a real family emergency. Jackson, he got himself into some trouble. He made some bad choices with an offshore sports book, and the people he owes, they aren't the kind of people who wait for a payment plan. They showed up here today, Olivia, while you were at work." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What does that have to do with my car?" "They wanted $15,000, my mom said, her voice trembling with that practiced martyr tone she always used to defend Jackson. "They were going to hurt him, Olivia. We don't have that kind of cash. Your father's 401k is tied up, and the house is already leveraged for Jackson's business loans. We had to do something." I stared at them, the reality of what they were saying slowly settling in my gut like lead. "You sold my car. We didn't have a choice," my dad snapped, his guilt finally turning into defensive anger. "The guy who came by, he owns a wholesale lot. He saw the Camry, saw it was in perfect condition, and paid off. He gave us $16,000 on the spot. It covered the debt and gave Jackson a little bit of cushion to get back on his feet." "You sold my car," I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The car I paid for, the car that has my name on the title. How did you even do that?" "I still have the power of attorney from when you were in college," my dad said, waving his hand dismissively as if a legal document justified a moral execution. "Look, Olivia, you're smart. You're the practical one. You've always been able to figure things out. You can take the light rail to work or the bus. It's a minor inconvenience for you, but for Jackson, this was life or death. He needs his reputation preserved. He's right on the verge of a major breakthrough with his new brand, and he can't have collectors looming over him. It would ruin everything he's built." "What he's built?" I yelled, the dam finally breaking. "He hasn't built anything. He spent $30,000 of your money on branding and lifestyle while I've been working 3 jobs to buy a car so I can get to work, and you just gave it away to pay for a gambling debt? Don't you dare judge your brother," my mother cried, pointing a finger at me. "We are a family. We sacrifice for each other. You have a stable job, Olivia. You're low risk. Jackson is a high reward investment. One day when he's famous, he'll buy you 10 cars. But right now, we had to protect the future of this family." I looked at Jackson. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just kept scrolling, pretending the world wasn't exploding around him. In that moment, I realized I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource. I was the spare tire they kept in the trunk, only useful when the golden one went flat. "I'm moving out," I said, my voice cold and steady. "With what car?" My dad chuckled, a cruel, stressed-out sound. "Be realistic, Olivia. You can't afford a deposit and a car payment on your salary. Just sit down, eat your roast, and let's move past this. We'll help you find a cheap used car in a few months. For now, just be the bigger person." I didn't sit down. I didn't eat. I walked upstairs, grabbed my backpack, and started packing. As I shoved my laptop and my few valuable belongings into the bag, I could hear them downstairs, laughing about something on the TV. The transaction was over. My car was gone. My future was sold. And to them, it was just another Tuesday. They thought they had trapped me. They thought that by taking my wheels, they had chained me to their house and their problems forever. What they didn't know was that I had been keeping a secret of my own. And that secret was about to grow into something they couldn't even imagine. I walked out of that house with my backpack on my shoulders and a hole in my heart where my family used to be. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the star of the family sitting on the couch or my father's practical daughter walking into the night. I had exactly $42 in my wallet and a bus pass that felt like a weight in my pocket. I spent that first night in a 24-hour diner on Colfax Avenue, nursing a single cup of black coffee and using their free Wi-Fi to hunt for a place I could afford. I wasn't looking for a home, I was looking for a bunker. I ended up in a studio apartment in a part of Aurora that most people avoid after dark. It was 400 square feet of peeling linoleum, a radiator that hissed like a trapped snake, and a window that rattled every time the wind caught it. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's TV, and the air always smelled faintly of old grease and damp laundry. But for the first time in 24 years, I was in a space where no one could take anything from me to give to Jackson. No one could reach into my life and sell a piece of it to cover a gambling debt. That was the night the practical girl died. I pulled my laptop out of my bag. It was an old MacBook, held together by stickers and sheer willpower, but it was the only piece of my future that they hadn't managed to sell. While my parents probably imagined me crying in a shelter, I was logging into a secure portal for high-end data architecture. You see, during those years, I was working retail and florist jobs to buy my Camry. I was also teaching myself Python, SQL, and cloud infrastructure. I had been taking small, anonymous freelance contracts for years, tucking the money away into a secret investment account my parents didn't even know existed. They thought I was a scribe. They had no idea I was a builder. I sat on the cold floor of that empty apartment. I didn't even have a chair yet, and I started to pivot. I stopped being Olivia, the daughter who paid the bills. I became Olivia, the architect of a new reality. My parents started calling 3 days later. I didn't answer. Jackson sent me a text at 11 p.m. "Hey, Dad says you're being dramatic. Can you Venmo me $50 for gas? I've got a meeting with a huge manager today and the tank is bone dry." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed and the phone went black. I didn't block him. I wanted to see every pathetic request. I wanted every message to be fuel for the fire I was lighting in that dark studio. Every "you up" and "family first," right? From them was a reminder of why I had to win. My secret life began in the blue light of that monitor. I landed a massive contract for a fintech startup in Silicon Valley that needed someone to fix a back-end database that 3 senior engineers had failed to repair. They didn't care that I was living in a slum in Colorado or that I was eating ramen noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They only cared that I could code circles around people with PhDs. I worked 18-hour days. I'd wake up when the sky was still gray, drink a cup of bitter instant coffee, and lose myself in strings of code until my vision blurred. I wasn't just earning a paycheck anymore. I was building a weapon. Every dollar I tucked away was a brick in a wall they would never be able to climb. I wasn't just surviving the exile. I was using it to construct an empire that would eventually make their entire world look like a speck of dust from 30,000 feet. November turned into a brutal, frost-covered December, and the silence from my end was absolute. I had changed my number for everyone except for a few essential contacts, but I kept my old phone active, sitting on the corner of my makeshift desk like a museum of my past life. I didn't reply, but I watched. My mother sent a text on December 15th. "We're having the neighborhood Christmas potluck, Olivia. It's a shame you're choosing to be bitter. Jackson is actually doing quite well. He's thinking about launching a podcast. We could use your help with the decorations, but I suppose you're too busy riding the bus to bother with family." I didn't flinch. I just looked at the lines of code on my monitor, a complex architectural overhaul for a logistics giant in Chicago. That single contract was worth $40,000. It was more than my father made in 6 months at the accounting firm. I wasn't riding the bus to be petty. I was riding it because every dollar saved was a dollar invested in my freedom. By January, the slum in Aurora felt less like a prison and more like a laboratory. I had developed a rhythm. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., cold shower to shock the system, 2 hours of deep work coding for the Chicago contract. Then I'd spend 8 hours on my real passion, a specialized AI-driven consulting framework for private aviation firms. I saw a gap in the market. Wealthy clients were tired of clunky booking systems and inefficient flight pathing. I was building the solution in the dark, one algorithm at a time. On January 22nd at 2:14 a.m., I reached my first major milestone. My secret investment account hit 6 figures, $102,450. I sat back in my thrift store chair, the springs groaning under my weight, and I thought about the Toyota Camry. My parents had sold it for $16,000 to save Jackson. I now had enough to buy 6 of them. But I didn't. I bought a better server instead. The messages from home continued, becoming increasingly desperate but never apologetic. My father sent one in February. Jackson's influencer manager says he needs another $5,000 to get a verified badge and some guaranteed followers. It's an investment, Olivia. We know you're probably struggling in that apartment, but if you could just contribute a little, we'll make sure Jackson pays you back when he's famous. I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the bare walls. They were still treating me like a piggy bank while I was becoming the bank itself. By March, my consulting firm, Vanguard Sky Logistics, was no longer a secret in the industry. I had landed 3 of the biggest private charter companies in the country as clients. They didn't know I was a 24-year-old girl in a hoodie. They only knew that my software saved them $3 million in fuel costs in the first quarter alone. On March 15th, exactly 5 months after I walked out, I signed a contract that changed everything. A legacy aviation firm out of Dallas bought a non-exclusive license for my pathing algorithm. The wire transfer hit my account 3 days later. Won $200,000. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. I was a millionaire in a studio apartment with a leaking ceiling. I could have moved into a penthouse in Cherry Creek. I could have bought a Ferrari and parked it in my parents' driveway just to hear the engine roar. But I wanted something bigger. I wanted to move in a way they couldn't even track. I began looking into business assets. As a consultant for private aviation, I was traveling constantly. Seattle, New York, Austin, Miami. Flying commercial was becoming a logistical nightmare for the volume of meetings I had. My tax attorney suggested a business-owned aircraft as a depreciable asset. That's when I saw it. A pre-owned Gulfstream G650. Sleek, powerful, and utterly beyond the imagination of people who argue over grocery coupons. I closed the deal in April. The down payment alone was more than my parents' house was worth. I hired a crew, a pilot named Captain Miller who didn't ask questions, and I had my company logo, a stylized V for Vanguard, painted on the tail. While I was finalizing the hangar lease at the Centennial Airport, a text came in from Jackson. He didn't even ask how I was. Hey, parents are losing the house, Olivia. Dad messed up some tax stuff trying to fund my last launch. We're all heading to Aspen for this rich donor gala my manager found. It's a last-ditch effort to save the house. Mom says you should come and help us look like a successful family. We'll even pay for your bus ticket. I stood on the tarmac, the sun reflecting off the polished white fuselage of my jet. The scent of jet fuel and expensive leather was a far cry from the wet pavement and pot roast of my old life. I'll be there, I replied. It was the first time I'd spoken to them in 6 months. I didn't tell them I was coming. I didn't tell them how. I let them keep the image of the bus-riding daughter in their heads. I wanted them to stay in that reality for just a few more days. I wanted the contrast to be so sharp it would cut. For 6 months, I had been building in the dark. I had been the invisible girl, the practical one, the one who was built for the grind. Well, they were right about one thing. I was built for the grind. but they forgot that the purpose of a grind is to sharpen a blade, and my blade was now razor sharp, polished, and ready to be revealed. The invitation didn't come as a phone call. It came as a frantic 8-minute-long voicemail from my mother, her voice trembling with a kind of manufactured tragedy that I knew all too well. I was sitting in my glass-walled office in Centennial, watching the sunset hit the wings of the planes outside when I finally pressed play. "Olivia, honey, please answer. It's a disaster. Your father he's in a dark place. Jackson's talent agency was a scam, and they took everything. The bank is sending notices, Olivia. They're talking about foreclosure on the house. Your childhood home." She paused for a sob that sounded remarkably practiced. "But there's a chance, a miracle. Jackson's new manager got us invited to the Emerald Gala in Aspen this weekend. It's for the highest of high society. There will be donors there, philanthropists, people who can save us. We need you there, Olivia. We need to show them the Fitzgeralds are a united, successful family. Please don't let your brother's future be destroyed because you're still holding a grudge over a car." I played it twice, not because I was moved, but because I wanted to memorize the sound of a woman who could ask for a united family 6 months after selling her daughter's only asset to pay a gambler. The audacity was breathtaking. They didn't want to see me. They wanted a prop. They wanted the practical daughter to stand in a cheap dress from a department store, smiling behind Jackson, making him look like a responsible man who just needed a little bridge loan to hit the big time. They thought I was still that girl. They imagined I was living in a basement somewhere, probably wearing the same old hoodie, desperate for a seat at their table again. I sent a text back 10 minutes later. "I'll be there. What time is the event?" My phone lit up instantly. My father was calling this time. I answered. "Olivia." "Thank God," he breathed. I could hear the relief, but not the kind of relief a father feels for a missing child. It was the relief of a man who just found a way to save his own skin. "We're staying at a small lodge outside of town. It's all we could afford. We're taking the shuttle up from Denver on Thursday. We'll meet you at the St. Regis for the pre-gala drinks. You have something decent to wear, right? Jackson needs to look like he comes from money, so try not to, look like you've been living in Aurora." "I have something to wear, Dad," I said, my voice as cold as the aspen snow. "Good. And listen, Olivia, Jackson is really stressed. Don't bring up the Camry. Don't bring up the past. Let's just focus on the miracle we need this weekend. We're telling people you've been doing some freelance office work and moved for a fresh start. Keep it simple." "I'll keep it very simple," I promised. "Great. Oh, and how are you getting there? The bus takes about 4 hours with the winter traffic. You should leave early." I looked at the flight manifest on my desk. My tail number was cleared for a 5:00 p.m. departure on Friday. It was a 25-minute hop. "Don't worry about my transportation," I said. "I've got it covered. I'll see you in Aspen." I hung up before he could ask anything else. I felt a strange, icy calm. They were inviting me to a charity gala, hoping to find a mystery donor to bail them out of a life of bad choices. They had no idea that the donor they were looking for was the daughter they'd discarded, and I had no intention of telling them until they were standing in the cold, watching the sky. The descent into Aspen-Pitkin County Airport is one of the most beautiful and nerve-wracking flights in the world. But as I sat in the plush leather seat of my Gulfstream, watching the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Maroon Bells rise up to meet us, I wasn't nervous. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. I took a sip of sparkling water and checked my reflection in the window. I wasn't the girl in the oversized hoodie anymore. I was wearing a tailored wool coat that cost more than Jackson's failed influencer camera equipment, and my hair was styled in a way that screamed boardroom, not bus stop. "We're cleared for landing, Ms. Fitzgerald," Captain Miller's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ground transportation is waiting at the private terminal." Down below, on the tarmac near the General Aviation Terminal, I knew they were there. My parents had texted me an hour ago, complaining about the freezing cold and how the shuttle from the parking lot had been 10 minutes late. They were standing near the fence of the Atlantic Aviation Terminal, huddled together, looking for a mystery donor who they believed was some wealthy old colleague of my father's coming in on a chartered flight. As the jet's wheels touched the runway with a soft chirp, I saw them. They looked small, not just physically, but small in spirit. My father was adjusting his tie in a way that looked desperate, and my mother was fussing over Jackson's hair, trying to make him look like a success story instead of a 30-year-old man who still lived in his childhood bedroom. The jet taxied toward the private hangar, the engines whined down to a hum, and the stairs lowered with a hydraulic hiss. I stepped out into the crisp, thin aspen air. The wind caught my coat, and for a moment, I just stood on the top step, looking down. My family was standing about 50 yards away, held back by the security gate. My mother was pointing. "Look, Robert, that must be the donor's plane. It's huge. Jackson, stand up straight. This person could change your life." I walked down the stairs, my heels clicking sharply against the asphalt. A black SUV pulled up right to the base of the steps, the driver holding the door open. I didn't get in. Instead, I started walking toward the gate, toward them. The closer I got, the more the expressions on their faces changed. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash of realization. First came the confusion. Who is that girl? She looks like... No, it couldn't be. Then came the shock. My mother's hand went to her mouth, her eyes bulging. My father's jaw literally dropped, his united family posture collapsing into a heap of disbelief. And Jackson. He just stood there, his phone half raised as if he was going to film a lifestyle vlog, but his thumb was frozen on the screen. I stopped 10 feet from the fence. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant roar of another plane taking off. "You're late," I said, my voice projecting easily across the gap. "The bus from Denver usually takes 4 hours, Dad. Did you have trouble with the schedule?" "Olivia?" my mother whispered, her voice cracking. Is that your plane? Who gave you that?" "Nobody gave me anything, Mom," I replied, looking at the gleaming white jet behind me. "You sold my car to pay for Jackson's debt. You told me I was built for the grind. So I ground. I built. And while you were busy waiting for a miracle to save your house, I became the miracle. Only problem is, I'm not here to save your house. I'm here to attend a gala for people who actually know how to build a future." Jackson finally found his voice, though it sounded weak and thin. "Olivia, sis, you're rich. Why didn't you tell us? We're family. We're losing everything, man. You have to help." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. "We're a family, Jackson, like the way we were a family on that rainy Tuesday. You didn't want a sister then. You wanted a paycheck. Well, the bank is closed." My mother tried to reach for my arm, her eyes swimming with those practiced, watery tears she used to use whenever she needed me to bail Jackson out of a mess. "Olivia, honey, you have to understand. We were just trying to preserve the family legacy. We always knew you were the strong one, the one who could handle a little hardship." I stepped back, letting the cold aspen wind create a physical barrier between us. "You didn't protect a legacy, Mom. You protected a lie. You sold my independence to fund a black hole." My father tried to straighten his cheap suit, his face a mask of wounded pride. "You're being dramatic, Olivia. We made a tough choice. And look at you now. You clearly didn't need our help." "I didn't need your help," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the airport tarmac, "but I needed my parents, and I found out exactly what I was worth to you, $16,000 and a bus pass." Jackson was staring at the jet, his mouth still hanging open, his mind probably already calculating how many followers he could get by posting a photo in front of it. He started to walk toward the stairs, but Captain Miller stepped into his path, a silent wall of professional refusal. "It's not yours, Jackson," I said. "Nothing I have is yours anymore." Unbeknownst to them, a social media influencer who had been invited to the gala was already filming the scene from the terminal balcony. The contrast was too perfect. The elegant woman in the tailored coat, the gleaming white jet, and the three desperate people begging for a miracle they didn't earn. By the time I checked my phone at the hotel, the video had been shared 10,000 times. The Fitzgerald favoritism was no longer a private family secret. It was a global scandal. My parents didn't get their donor. Instead, they got a mirror held up to their faces, and they didn't like what they saw. Now, 6 months after that day in Aspen, I wake up in a home I bought with my own hard work. I don't check the bus schedule anymore, but I still remember the cold sting of that rain. My parents lost their house to foreclosure. Jackson is finally working a 9-to-5 at a warehouse, realizing that greatness requires a foundation he never built. They still send texts, but I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up without an invoice. To anyone told they're just practical, keep grinding. One day you won't just see the sky, you'll own it.